Okay. We'll close item number 5. We move to item number 6, duck stamp request, wildlife staff specialist Mark Farman and Mike Zarodka for possible action. The commission will review and may take action to approve projects submitted for funding from duck stamp funds. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Drew and other commission members. My name is Mark Farman. I'm a staff specialist with the Habitat Division. I manage the 2 programs that are the next 2 agenda items. First is duck stamp and then upland game bird stamp program. I'm going to give a brief overview of what's been proposed for new projects for duck stamp program in fiscal year 17 in a minute, and then Mike Zarodka, who manages our wildlife management areas, is going to say a few words, give you an update on WMA projects. Hopefully you've all received copies of the 2 the duck stamp and upland game bird reports. I'll be briefly hitting the highlights of those for you. The first one is as we just said, the duck stamp program. If you turn to page 17, that's a key table. It shows you the brand new projects that are being proposed for fiscal year 17. NDOW staff is recommending that the commission approve these today. Most of these projects are important sources of matching for not only the WMA grant that Mike Zarodka manages, but also a portion of the game management grant that the game division manages that deal with waterfowl. So you'll see that there's a number of important projects that not only improve wetlands and other conditions, but help track waterfowl as they move around the state and other parts of the western United States. Another thing you'll notice is that the wood duck project is now over. It's not proposed on this list of projects. That's a new development. It's been a multi-year project. There are some preliminary results provided in the project summaries at the beginning of the report. And if you turn to the next page, which is page 18, a question the commission always has is what happens to the budget status of the account if we approve this level of spending. That's summarized briefly on page 18. As you'll see, the account started with a balance of $411,000 at the beginning of fiscal year 2016, and essentially if this level of funding, which we're recommending you approve today, which is $90,955, the account still will have a healthy balance of $316,533 at the end of the fiscal year 17. So before I turn it over to Mike to say a few words about WMA projects, are there any questions from the commission?
Questions or comments? Seeing none.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, all commissioners. For the record, Mike Zarodka, Wildlife Staff Specialist in the Habitat Division. I oversee the Wildlife Management Area Program. Just a quick update on work completed during fiscal year 16 and how some of those will tie into some of the FY17 proposals. Duck stamp funding was once again used to support NDF on prescribed burns at some of our wildlife areas. This funding helps offset their costs of the fire engines and conservation crews that they provide. Controlled burns were performed at Mason Valley this last spring and Carson Lake wetlands last fall. Our annual contribution to Ducks Unlimited was also done in FY16 and proposed again for 17. This annual contribution of $10,000 was made to DU for land purchases, wetland restorations, and conservation easements on private lands in the Prairie Pothole region of Canada. Over the past 18 years, NDOW has contributed over $130,000 to this effort. We request that the funding be used to support projects in Alberta, since waterfowl band recovery indicates a substantial portion of the waterfowl that migrate through Nevada come from there. We also have wetland enhancement projects continuing at Key Pittman at the North Ponds by the office and shop area, and at Overton, WMA on Pintail and Wilson Ponds. Ducks Unlimited Wetland Engineers performed surveys on these areas a couple years back. That was the first phase of this. The second phase, which is currently happening this fiscal year, is purchasing of water control structures, culverts, and other necessary materials that will be needed for the final construction phase of these projects. We plan to move forward with work at Key Pittman WMA first. We will be receiving construction plans for Overton soon, but those will need to be reviewed and approved by the National Park Service before any work can be done. As many of you know, the Overton Wildlife Area, unlike many other wildlife areas, is not owned by the state. It's actually situated on National Park Service property that we manage as a WMA underneath a cooperative agreement. So that adds a step to that process. But we will, hopefully continue with that project this next fiscal year. And one other thing that you may notice on this year's proposals with regard to what's been done in the past is a lot of the annual maintenance projects such as weed spraying and well pumping that we had requested funding from in the past are now incorporated into the annual WMA grant to cover those costs. So this was done based on past commission and CAB recommendations. So with that, thanks for your time, and I'll send it back to Mark if you wanted to wrap this up.
Questions for Mike? I know I have one at least.
Sure.
The one I had was in reading over the Overton farming proposal, and I think there was a line in there that said over the years we've had a lack of appropriate farming techniques or approaches or whatever, and I appreciate the candor, but at the same time that made me a little bit concerned. Is that something on our end that needed to be improved? Is that something with a cooperator that needed to be improved? What's the situation, and how are we making sure we don't have more inappropriate farming practices?
Well, as far as why we're into this farming lease at Overton to begin with, this goes back to years ago. There used to be 5 full-time employees stationed out at the Overton Wildlife Area. Now we're down to 3 full-time employees. So that's why we, advertised a farming lease agreement, and we had Stan Hardy was the only person that bid. So as far as the feedback that I've gotten from the employees on the wildlife area and the Clark Cab is the fields and the work that Stan has been doing has greatly improved the area and the hunting on that property.
Okay. I appreciated seeing the Ducks Unlimited support material in here, the report. I did note on several of the projects that there were papers or presentations that have been given at various professional organization gatherings and conferences. So that may be something, Director Wadsley, that we put on our radar for future project updates, because I know between the wood ducks and some of the other projects and banding things that are going on, those are, I think, presentations that this body would be interested in, and certainly I would. And I appreciate, as always, the report coming out. When I first got support material, I only had a table. There was a short rant until I opened my envelope that had the full report. So again, I appreciate all the detail that you guys put into that, because it makes our job a lot easier, and I think answers a lot of questions even before we get into the meeting. So additional questions? Yep.
Thank you,
Commissioner Bliss.
So Mike, for last year, year before, I've always asked about Steptoe Valley and the 3C Ranch. And again, I see that we're just going to basically do some weed control there. I'd like to know what your plans are in the future there. It seems to me that, years ago that was in production before it was purchased. And there was a lot of wildlife there, and there's wildlife there now too as well, quite a bit. But it just seems to me that we're not taking advantage of having the water and the land that we could actually be utilizing with food plots, such as we are in some of the other projects. I think it could be a key corridor for ducks and geese to stop there and stay for a while. I don't know if the farm lease agreement type stuff, if that could ever be put back into production. I know some of the ditches, it's been a long time since it's been irrigated and would take quite a bit of work. But if there was an agreement made that, hey, we lease this ground out to you, you put so much in alfalfa or whatever, but leave a crop, you got to have so much of a grain crop to leave for the wildlife or something. But And in the past, a previous employee wanted some of that ranch to go back to native ground. In my opinion, that's a waste. There's native ground all the way around it. That we should be taking advantage of what we have there and what that place is capable of doing. And I know there's probably the majority of the water is going into Cummings Lake right now, trying to fill it up. So I understand this year maybe there might be a little lackage of water in order to for that. Sorry. There may be a little water shortage with it all going into Cummings Lake to fill that up. But I'd really like to see something more done out there, and if you could fill me in on some of your future plans, that'd be.
Sure.
Mike, before you answer that, Mr. Ward in Reno, I saw you come up to the screen. I just want to make sure you can hear us all right. The question that was just asked was in regards to Steptoe Wildlife Management Area and the plans for going forward.
Mr. Chair, Harry Ward for the record, Deputy Attorney General. I just like to remind the commissioners to speak directly into the mic when they turn their head. It does fade in and out down here at the satellite facility.
Okay, thank you. Everyone's clear on the question that was asked, though?
Yes, we're good.
Mike, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree with everything you said there. As far as the food plots, they do happen at Steptoe Valley. They're incorporated into the grant and have been for the last few years. I mean, these are smaller acreage food plots, probably less than 10 acres in size. So it's not the larger fields like you see at Key Pittman or Kirch. So those do occur down there. And the one thing that we also did that was completed in 2008 was the wetland enhancement project with DU that put in those 12 ponds in the North Meadows. So that's where a lot of the management focus has gone the last few years. And now that area has kind of vegged up and is more stable, I agree. I think we'll look at spending more time on getting those old ag fields back into some type of production.
I appreciate that. To me, it's a missed opportunity to really enhance what that place is capable of doing. It's an unbelievable spot, and it's close to Ely there. And if there's more that can be done there, more people would be able to enjoy it. So appreciate your.
Absolutely.
Additional questions? Commissioner Valentine, and if we could just pass that mic down so the remote feeds are good.
Try to do it without dropping it.
Mr. Zaruka, at the Overton Wildlife Management Aid, didn't we have some flood damage from the 15 storms? And just an update, has that flood damage been repaired?
Yeah, we were hit pretty hard, and it was later on in 2014. But we've repaired some of the damage that was done. There's still a lot that needs to be fixed. That's one of the areas, like a lot of our wildlife areas, we've had a lot of turnover. We've had a lack of personnel in some of these areas. So we were, last year too at Overton, we only had one person working out there for a while. So that put us behind. But one thing is, we've been working on fixing stuff ourselves, and we've also been working with the Clark County Regional Flood Control District on future plans on how we can better prepare or what we can build to minimize damage from these events in the future. So those discussions and those meetings are still going on.
Okay, thanks for the update.
You bet.
Additional questions from the commission? Nothing? Okay. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank
Anything
you.
else for now? All right. With that, we'll open it up. County Advisory Board inputs on item 6, duck stamp request. Mr. Shea, come on up.
Sean Shea, Washoe County. We approved this as written, but we just had a couple comments. In this duck stamp program book, we saw that some of the project proposals had project cost breakdown sheets in the back, and some didn't. It was really nice to see the cost break. I mean, you could just look down the sheet, and it just made sense to read that instead of all the wording in each one. So it'd be nice to see that for each proposal. And then the other one question that was brought up is like on page 21 and on page 24, if you go down to equipment, and I know this is nitpicking, but every dollar counts. And we heard it yesterday at the Heritage Count meeting. And if you go down to 4B, where it says corn corn bait in 90 bags for $14. If you go to page 24 on the next one, you got corn 45 bags for $15. Seems to me if you bought all those corn bags, you could get it for $13. You know, it just seems like they're just $1 here. I mean, at Walmart, they're like $9 a bag. So it just seems to me that they could do one big clump buy and save, or at least put that money to buying more corn bags. So it was just another thing that we just saw. So we just want to bring that up.
Okay. Additional County Advisory Board inputs? Public comment in Elko? Mr. Flowers?
Rex Flowers speaking for myself. On your budget status in the books, I believe page 18, it has administrative cost of 10%. And I know we've always had administrative costs. I understand those when the department is having to oversee outside sources, like with heritage programs and with predator control. But the programs that you're looking at here and you're going to look at in Upland Game are all projects that only the department can come forward with. And they're done by their personnel, and I question whether or not we need to have such a high administrative cost, or if the cost could be less and more money could be put on the ground. I know we have a big carryover as far as our money's in the bank every year, but still, again, every dime counts. Thank you.
Additional public comment in Elko? Okay, seeing none, let's go to Las Vegas. Item number 6, duck stamp request.
No comment in Reno.
Okay, how about Las Vegas? Las Vegas, are you still with us? Any public
Yes,
comment?
no comments in Las Vegas. Sorry about that.
That's all right, thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission. Whoever wants to answer the question, because I'm curious, on the corn costs as well as the overhead. I'm sure you folks have thought about that, so I'll give you a chance to address it.
Mark Farman, Staff Specialist. I have to admit I do not know much about corn costs. The person, is this a Russell proposal? The person that wrote the proposal is available by cell phone right now, so if you want, I can call and look into that.
I don't know that we need to do that. I think just make sure that we are, I think, all concerned about making sure we are as efficient as possible in spreading our money as far as we can. So.
Okay, yeah, I can make sure that happens. And then I could briefly, just the reason we don't have the cost table on all proposals is we're trying to minimize paper. So what we've instructed the proposal authors is only include that breakdown if there's more than one cost item to the proposed project. Some of our projects are so simple that they literally are just the purchase of pesticide or herbicides, whatever. So if it's a very straightforward, simple project, we felt that we didn't want to use up as much paper with a full cost table for everything. But if the commission prefers, we can easily go back to having a cost table for all projects. That's not a problem.
Okay. I think that stands to reason, makes some sense to me. Talk to me just a little bit about the 10% overhead costs and what that covers within the department.
Sure. The 10% indirect cost pays for what the private sector would call overhead. Those are things that are not project and program related. So, for example, it pays for the financial services section staff. We have budget analysts that work on these different programs. They do budget updates for me and for Mike and for other staff. And there's other indirect costs. I believe that there's other positions that aren't part of our in-house programs, but it's mostly FSS stuff. And as you can see, the 10% is only charged to the it's 10% of the revenue accrued, so it's not as high as it could be if it was charged to our total expenditures. So that's basically what it is. It covers helps pay for the costs of mostly our budget analysts that update the budgets, which we call collectively FSS staff.
Okay. Additional questions from the commission? Comments? Okay, seeing none, this is an action item. If there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move to approve the proposed fiscal year 2017 duck stamp projects as presented by the department in the amount of $90,955. I'll second that.
Okay, so I have a motion by Commissioner Johnston, a second by Commissioner Bliss to approve the Nevada Department of Wildlife Duck Stamp Program for fiscal year 2017 as presented. Is there any question or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I appreciate your gentlemen's input. With that, we'll close item 6 and open item 7, Upland Game Bird Stamp Request. Wildlife Staff Specialist Mark Farman and Sean Espinoza for possible action. The Commission will review and may take action to approve projects submitted for Upland Game Stamp funds.
Thank you. Mark Farman again, Habitat Staff Specialist. The next program we're going to talk about is the Upland Game Bird Stamp Program, where staff is requesting that you approve the proposed projects for fiscal year 17, which are included in this other report that we sent you. It's the annual Upland Game Bird Stamp Program report. Like I did with Duck Stamp, I'm going to give you a real quick overview of where we stand from the standpoint of the program as a whole, and then Staff Specialist Sean Espinoza has joined me. Give you a quick update on a lot of the upland game bird projects that he's managing. So if you turn to page 20 in your report, that's the key table that summarizes the new projects. We have a long list of projects. Most of them are being proposed by Sean. Sean uses the expenditures under this program as a very important source of match for his sage grouse conservation grant. The other programs that use this as a source of match are the water development program, otherwise known as Guzzlers. It's managed by Matt Maples. The game management grant uses this, and then lastly, the same WMA grant that Mike Zaratka manages also uses these projects as an important source of match. Staff is requesting that the Commission approve a grand total of $274,530 worth of new projects. If you turn to page 22, you'll see what that would do to the balance in the related budget account. To make a long story short, the balance at the end of fiscal year 17 is projected to be $437,211, which assumes that you approve the full amount that we're requesting. And as you can see, a lot of the same assumptions as far as the indirect costs. It's 10% of the revenue accrued. That's included in that table. Shows the balance at the start of FY16. So before I turn it over to Sean, are there any questions regarding the overall program or the budget status?
Questions from the Commission? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Mr. Espinoza, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Drew, members of the Commission, Sean Espinoza for the record, Upland Game Staff Specialist, Game Division. So there's 10 projects that I've proposed during this fiscal year, but I'll just kind of go back through some of the projects that we have worked on here in the recent past that sort of continue today. And one of those is our Columbian Sharp-tailed Grouse Restoration Project that I know many of you are familiar with, especially you, Commissioner Morai. So since 2013, we've released 190 birds from southeastern Idaho into the Bull Run Basin in Elko County. We went through a period this last year where we had a particularly hard winter. It was, I think, 150 to 160% of average snowpack in the Bull Run Basin. So during that time frame, we experienced some elevated mortality, unfortunately, during that period. But we still had a number of birds that were present on the lek prior to release this year. This year we released another 50 birds at the release site. There was 35 females and 15 males that were released at that particular site. There's been upwards, I think, of 21 nests that have been located this year from the birds that were released. So it was a pretty successful year. One thing we are finding, and a preference for us, would be to take yearling females back. Those have higher survival rates and seem to be more productive than the adult females, and we feel that's because those particular birds are keyed into their habitat and are used to being in, their native habitat in southeastern Idaho, fidelic to those sites. Yearlings don't seem to have that fidelity, seem to stick around a little bit better, whereas the adult females, once we release them, tend to venture off a little farther, and once wildlife moves more, they're more susceptible to predation. But we were not able to get the complement of females this year that we would have liked, and we think that may have been a timing issue when we went to do the capture, and it may have also been an issue dealing with there may not have been a large number of yearlings on the landscape there in southeastern Idaho, meaning that they didn't have a very good production year last year. But we did place some remote cameras on the lek there this year, and it seemed like a fair number of birds that were on that lek, females and males, were unmarked, telling us that a lot of birds have been born in the basin and recruited into the population, so that's a good sign. Our mountain quail and ruffed grouse translocation efforts, last year we moved 100 mountain quail from southeastern Oregon and moved them to northwestern Nevada into the Via area into Horse Creek. That was the second release and was the final release for that particular area. We've received several reports last year from folks reporting in mountain quail harvest of birds coming from the Via Rim area, so that was encouraging. Also last year we moved 38 ruffed grouse from northeastern Nevada to Stewart Creek in the Toyabe Range, and we've already gotten a report from a bird observer that heard drumming in Mohawk and Wisconsin Canyon, which is in the central portion of the Toyabe Range, which about 2 to 3 drainages over from Stewart Creek release site. So they have seemingly expanded already. Our greater sage-grouse monitoring project, as we've done in the past, we use that funding particularly for lek count technicians. They help out with the biologists during that time frame counting leks, and that's a big help during that time of the year when a lot of biologists are busy with big game surveys as well. We use that funding for aerial lek survey using a helicopter in Humboldt, Churchill, Mineral, and Lyon County in the western region. We've also used that funding for infrared surveys. We continue those today using Hawaii Air. This year there were 36 leks in northeastern Nevada that were counted specifically by infrared technology, and we had USGS had ground observers on the lek at the same time the aircraft flew over the lek, and they were doing double-blind observations to try and get a rate of error between the aircraft and the on-the-ground observation. And so far it looks like there's just a 5% difference between those counts, so it's very reliable. So that's a publication actually that may be coming out at the end of the year. Some new projects. A new project that we started this year was most of our sage-grouse monitoring projects, and you'll notice on here that there's 8 of them of the 10 being proposed, really. Most of our sage-grouse research projects are in relation to something that's been done on the landscape, whether it's a geothermal facility, a transmission line, a mine, or something of that nature. So we really wanted to get some information on sage-grouse in areas that are pretty pristine in habitat conditions. So we selected the east side of the Santa Rosas in northern Nevada and Monitor Valley, Monitor Range in central Nevada. This is the initial year of that project. crews were able to capture and radio mark 23 individuals, all female, at the monitor site, and 30 females at the Santa Rosa site. So we're gaining quite a bit of good information in an area that really is absent any major disturbances, save for a couple of dirt roads. Another new project is the bi-state monitoring project, and this is part of our commitment to the service to continue monitoring that population a little bit more in depth. There was 23 females that were radio marked there between the Desert Creek and Mount Grant PMUs, and this is part of evaluating the effectiveness of the bi-state action plan. Another new project, and this kind of goes hand in hand with another project that's been ongoing for a while. We feel that it's pretty important to monitor the effects of pinyon juniper removal on greater sage grouse, and so we're working with the BLM and Utah State University in monitoring 2 populations in southeastern Nevada, one in Cave Valley and one in Hamlin Valley. That project this year was a little bit difficult to try and capture birds out of Cave Valley. They had more success in Hamlin Valley. All of the birds were receiving GPS PTT transmitters to monitor basically hourly and daily movements in both of those in relation to some of the treatments that have gone on in both of those valleys. Likewise, we've had another project in the Desatoyas for a little longer period of time monitoring the effects of some pinyon juniper work that's gone on there. That's a little bit more of a landscape level project where we have some horse gathers that have gone on there and quite a few meadow enhancement projects that have taken place in the Desatoyas. That kind of covers it, except for one other project. The Raven Control project continues in the Virginia mountains, and we're basically in the 8th year of monitoring that particular population. When that project started, it was really a before-after control impact analysis that was going to be conducted because of the threat of a wind energy development that was going to be placed on Tule Ridge and in Spanish Flat. That never came to fruition, but one of the things we had learned from that project was that ravens were having an effect on that population, largely due to its proximity to Reno, its proximity to Susanville, Highway 395. So we figured that this would be a great spot to do a pretty intensive raven control effort. We're in the 3rd year of that effort of raven control. The first year, the raven control wasn't quite as intense as we would have liked, so we'd like to do another year of intensive raven control. That would be the last year of raven control, and then monitor the population after the control to see how it responds. Nest success was pretty abysmal in the early stages of the project, somewhere around 18 to 23% nest success, when range-wide averages are about 42 to 43%. So that nest success has come up. We have seen an increase in the population, but we want to know what happens after the control ceases. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have for any of the projects, new or old.
Questions for Sean? Commissioner Moray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sean, if you go to, I believe it's page 81, the project on page 81, Cricket Springs Restoration. And actually, the paragraph that I have a question on is on page 83. Seems there's a fence will be purchased, provided free of charge to the landowner. NDOW will require a fence loan agreement that requires the leasee to provide all maintenance for the fence. Could you expand on that and tell me how that works? Is there's a leasee that is different from the landowner, or and how does that work? I wanted to know if the landowner is on board and the leasee is on board with having to pick up the maintenance on the fence.
Okay. I can't answer that question, but maybe Carrie can.
This is a project proposed by Kerry.
We'll allow it. Ms. Huebner, welcome.
Commission. Yes, we've been working with that landowner, it's the project. The person is becoming the leasee, going to be now the actual ranch manager, and they're fully aware of that. These fence loan agreements we get into with landowners with elk exclusionary fences and that. And the way those usually read is if there's damage caused by like livestock or that type of thing, the maintenance is on them. If there's something, an elk causes a problem or something like that, we usually pick that up. But yeah, they're very much aware of that and on board with the project. Actually, we're one of the ones that were instrumental in proposing this project because they're having a tough time keeping the cattle off of that spring.
Thank you.
While Carrie's up there, are there additional questions on the Cricket Springs project? I just had one, and it's kind of related to what Pete had mentioned, but I'm assuming that we're all on board with the water rights and everything that needs to happen through the state engineer's office.
Yes.
Everything's good to go there?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Anything else? Okay. Additional, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bliss.
Maybe it's on, sorry, can you pass that? Thank you, Chairman. Hello? Thank you, Chairman. My question is on the other one. Is it
Evans Creek
and Indian Creek? And if I understand this right, these are private land holdings that the department has, or the state-owned land that we're going to fence off, and some of the springs in there. Some of my questions were, like Commissioner Drew said, was water right issues. Is there any other individual that has water rights on these particular springs as far as stock water that's going to be fenced out? I know some of them, I'm not sure which project it is now, but there was going to be a pipeline. Is that on Cricket Spring? There's a pipeline. But these other ones doesn't have anything like that. And it also stated that it's the only water source in a lot of miles for wildlife and livestock. And I was just curious if you guys have been working with the livestock owners on these particular projects as well, and if everybody's on board with what's going on.
I apologize. I don't have any knowledge about that particular project. I believe, I don't know if Mark wants to clarify, but there was these two projects originally were going to be requesting some upland game stamp funds. Since then, we've moved them, and they're going to be going after habitat conservation fee funds. And so at the time that they present that, the folks that propose these projects should be here and be able to answer any questions on that. So unless Mark has more knowledge of that, I will leave that to him. Thank you.
Mark Farman for the record. Just to clarify, the project in question has been proposed by Matt Glenn and Steve Faree, and unfortunately Steve just left. I'm not sure exactly where he went. We don't know the specifics on that, but I do want to point out that it's not a case of habitat conservation fee taking the place of upland game money. They're asking for both. So the project that you're asking about is part of the request by staff today to be approved. So a specific question like that, unfortunately, I can call Steve on his cell phone if you want me to, but unfortunately I don't have detailed information about that.
No, that's fine, Mark, but I just want to make sure that everybody that it's going to affect is on board with it, and that all the laws or the legal stuff is met with water rights.
Sure.
Because a simple project could turn into a mess really quick when you start getting into that stuff. The other comment I had is reading through some of this where it pertains to livestock grazing. The state's had ownership of this land since 2006, I believe, according to this. How come it's taken this long if all of this this negative impact's been being done? Why has it taken this long to get to this point where something's going to get done about it? Alan?
Mr. Janae, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, for the record, Alan Janae, Habitat Division Chief. And so the spring that is there, it has been something that we've been monitoring and we've actually been treating weeds on. And we've been watching these parcels since we acquired them in 2006. And it was a matter of just timing and looking at it and going, okay, well, let's, as we're treating the weed infestation, it's obvious that we need to exclude to allow the other species to come back in. And so what it was with a water source like that is it has a lot of traction ability. And so by spraying, we weren't getting the release we needed. And so by fencing, we're going to use pipe rail fencing. It's a temporary. So if we want to and we get the release and the species we want, we can remove it. So.
I guess just one comment. Some of the way that it was written and put together kind of struck. I didn't like the part where it just kept going after the livestock grazing over and over again. It's one thing if there is an issue and we build a fence and we try to correct problems and we work with the livestock owners to try to get to that point. And it's a lot like Ms. Evans said earlier, the synergy within these two groups. I think we got to be more on the same page with each other and work together. And in some of the way that this is written, to me, it's going the opposite direction of that. And so in the future, when some of this stuff is, I think it needs to be a little better put together, in my opinion.
You bet. No problem. I will pass that along. That is to a new employee who just took that position back this fall. So absolutely, I'll pass that along.
Stir up a lot of old.
Yep. No, understood. And that's not the road we want to go down.
We're trying to get past that, and in order to, we all agree that we're much better off that way.
You bet.
So,
and the ranches that are adjacent to that, we work well with Squaw Valley Ranch. We work really well with those guys, and so it isn't a fact of if there's a slight tone in that direction. That isn't the case with the permittees in that area. So.
As long as they understand that, I guess.
You betcha.
And just while you're up here, Alan, I did have a couple of similar questions in terms of, especially with the spring projects, making sure, everything's good with the water rights. I had a question on fence type on the Evans Creek project that you just answered. And then the only other question I had was on the noxious weed control, especially with the Medusa head. I'm glad to hear that there has been some treatment going on. Are there plans to continue that? Because I think the way it was proposed here is it was like a one-time project. There wasn't going to be funding requested in future years, and I guess my fear is if you fence it, Medusa head's pretty tough to deal with. So my hope is that we'd keep an eye on that, and if we have to do treatments and maybe some drill seeding or something to get some more desirable species in there, that my hope would be we'd be looking at that in the future, and I'm sure we will. But I don't know the way this was drafted necessarily. Not so much disallowed for it, but didn't indicate that there might be future options, especially on noxious weeds. So I don't know.
No, Chairman Drew, as you know, every year we come to you with, noxious weed treatment plans, and the tone of that may have been a one-time right, but that doesn't mean that we won't continue our efforts and our partnerships with those other agencies, especially where we find novel sites. We definitely stay involved. The western part of the state, it's becoming more of an issue, and we're continuing to play over there, but it's becoming so large that it's quickly expanding beyond our capabilities. But we'll continue to partner and play a role in that. That's definitely a concern of ours, and we don't want to see that one replace cheatgrass. So,
right. Appreciate that. Additional questions for Mr. Janae while he's at the microphone? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Any other questions before we go to comment? All right. So what we will do is open it up to County Advisory Board input on item 7, upland game bird stamp requests. County Advisory Boards.
For the record, Paul Dixon. I just, first off, to state that we did unanimously agree with the proposals as written, but one of the statements that was made and we had a discussion around was the effort that we put into the predator plan or the wildlife management plan, whatever I'm not sure what we're calling it at this point anymore. We keep changing the name. And the amount of effort that we put into sage grouse in the upland game bird plan The sportsmen and their dollars with matching grants and other NGOs, we're investing around $1.3 or $4 million into doing things. And I want to get back to Commissioner Morai's point. That's a very important species to ranchers and people who do stuff on the land. And to make note that the sportsmen, I think, are really stepping up in studies and in predator control and other things to try to help that species and understand it more and keep us things. And it's just to note that, I mean, in a large sense, we've really stepped up in a big way as sportsmen, and we should be proud of that. Thank you.
Okay. Additional county advisory boards. Public comment in Elko. Item 7, excuse me. Seeing none, let's go to Reno.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, comment in Reno.
Mr. Chairman, Bobby McCullum, I have a question, if I may. There was a discussion in the report by Sean Espinoza about intensive raven control effort, and it was due to a large increase in the raven population. I wanted to know, what is the raven population, and what is the percentage increase? Thank you.
Okay. Additional public comments in Reno?
No more comment in Reno.
And how about Las Vegas? Item number 7, upland game bird stamp request.
No. No comment in Las Vegas.
Okay. Bring it back to the commission. Sean, if you're available to address ravens and any monitoring work that has gone on specific to the Virginia range.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Drew, members of the commission. Sean Espinoza, for the record, Upland Game Staff Specialist. I don't specifically have the numbers on the raven population increase, but there was cameras placed on sage grouse nests, and the number one culprit for removing sage grouse eggs from the nests was ravens. And being that sage grouse nest success was so low, it was really driving the population down over the last few years of the study. So we made a informed choice there that this would be a good research effort to take advantage of, in terms of, we know what pre-treatment nest success looks like. We know numbers of ravens based on the USGS is conducting raven and raptor surveys, both pre-treatment, during the treatment, and we'll be doing it post-treatment as well, so we'll be able to evaluate what happens with the raven population there. I do know that the Virginia Mountain site, I think, was the second highest raven density of any of their survey areas around the state. The number one, or the highest population density of ravens in the state, was in the Pine Nut Mountains, located near Carson City.
And if I'm not mistaken, Sean, the funding that we're approving today is more for the long-term monitoring for a variety of factors, and the lethal removal component, the raven removal component, is really more coming out of the predator plan that was approved last time?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Additional questions or follow-up for Sean while he's up here? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Bliss.
Thank you, Chairman Drew. Sean, I understand how important it is for all of these monitoring projects that you have listed here. It takes up the majority of the funding that's in this account. And I know where we're at with the sage grouse population and it being a hot topic, and all the information that we can gather is the most important. As you continue on, do you see a transition going with some of these dollars going from the majority of it to monitoring to going back to some actual projects? We've learned that the PJ removal, there's been a lot of studies out there already that show that, the birds don't like being around any of these, with trees and these higher, because of the predation aspect from the hawks and everything else that's there. So if some of this money can transition into more PJ type projects, maybe water developments, opening up some ground, I'm familiar with, and I've spoke with you about it. Behind my place was a crested wheat seeding, and the birds used to strut there. and that seeding got so overgrown that those birds actually left and moved, 4 miles north and strut in the middle of a big wide county road now because that seeding is so overgrown and they're such show-offs, they can't be seen. And so there's areas like that maybe there was some traditional leks that may be better to try to improve that ground to see if those birds would go back to their original places where they were strutting and get out of a county road. So there's a lot of projects I think that could be done, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are going forward, how some of that can be incorporated.
Yeah, Commissioner Bliss, I certainly appreciate the question. And I probably should have led off with kind of my broad overview thinking of what we're trying to do here. But I should mention that the research projects that we've funded and have undertaken over the last 10 years or so, and there's been about 10 different study sites around the state, that information was integral into informing the habitat categorization map that the state of Nevada has developed. All those telemetry locations went into developing resource selection function models and looking at areas that were really important to the bird and from a seasonal standpoint and an annual standpoint. So I think that's one of the big outcomes that maybe we don't see by just simply looking at these projects on an individual basis. So that's been truly important. I don't foresee these projects are a lot of work. It's like tending a garden all the time. And I don't quite foresee this level of monitoring continuing over the next 10 years of my career, per se. I foresee probably the next 3 years being pretty intensive. And then after that, I'd like to ramp down a little bit, take that information and apply it to the landscape. So we'll take that, and I think there's going to be some information that's going to point us into some directions where we can make some management changes, whether it's active or passive. And we can target some areas that, hey, we can really improve this area just by doing this, and we'll get an uplift in the population. So I think that's my overall goal, is to get to that point, get enough information where we can make an informed decision that will stand up potentially in court. We may get there, I don't know. But we want to have that background information in our hip pocket to be able to say, yeah, we made a good informed decision here. And we're going to have to continue monitoring some of those things to prove who knows where we'll get in the next 20 years with the species. But we're in that mode right now in the bi-state. I think we can kind of use that as a model. If we find out some positive things there, then I think we'll have that evidence to be able to support some of these projects.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? If not, I believe we've taken our public comment, CAB input. So unless there's further question or discussion, I would entertain a motion.
I just have a quick comment, Mr. Chairman. I just really like seeing, I'm sure there's work that goes into getting these sage grouse conservation grants and the other game management grants, as well as working with Carson Valley Trucker Club, NBU Midas. I know that takes time and effort. And when you look at this, $274,000 of upland game bird stamp money and having that leveraged by about another $1 million from other sources, it's probably a lot of work that goes along with that. It's great to see how the sportsman dollar on the stamp money is being leveraged to that amount. My hat's off to those, everyone in the department involved, as well as the sportsman's groups that are contributing to the plan. So that's an excellent, and same with the waterfowl. I saw that.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the proposed fiscal year 2017 upland game bird stamp projects as proposed by the department, $274,540.
Second. I have a motion by Commissioner Johnston and a second by Commissioner Wallace to approve the Endow Upland Game Bird Stamp Program fiscal year 2017. Are there questions or discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And we'll close item 7.